So how are you? How is everything? I think we haven't properly met yet.
Yeah, doing well. Actually haven't been playing much SWTOR lately. But how about you? Looks like you're still
Yeah,
playing and putting out videos.
I took a break for like a summer vacation. That was 3 weeks ago, which is nice. Sometimes, I just like to I guess take a break sometimes, especially if you if you like me play this game every day, it can get a bit too much.
Yeah.
So it's nice to just either like play something else once in a while, or just, I went on vacation, so I didn't even have a laptop or anything with me. I just completely disconnected, didn't play at all, almost didn't think about my PowerTech. Almost.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I'm back, I think, for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and I'm pretty much back on it. Yeah, at least every day or every other day. But yeah. But yeah, it's a bit quiet in my guild, to be honest. I'm not quite sure where my guildmates are. They all have, I think, like real life plans. So like I was playing yesterday, all day, pretty much solo, and it's interesting out there. I played some games on Starforge. You said you're from, or mostly playing on Starforge as well, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty much exclusively playing on Starforge these days.
Mm-hmm. But originally you were from like a different server, or you've always been on that one?
I was from Shadowlands originally. And then there were a couple different patches, like during 4.0 and 6.0, where I played on, it was Harbinger at the time, and then Satil Shan.
Yeah.
But my main server has always been Shadowlands / Starforge.
Okay, so that's like after I don't know, there were so many server merges, I completely forgot. Especially like all the US servers. In the beginning, there were, maybe like over 90 servers, and there were so many, like Prophecy of the Five, I remember. And Harbinger, of course, rings a bell. Shadowlands rings a bell. But I mean, back then I played on the EU servers all the time. So starting on the German ones. And then later on the, English EU server, I guess. But now there's only, how many are there now? 5 or 6, I think.
There's like 5 or 6, yeah. Because there's a two NA, there's a EU English, EU French, EU German, and then the APAC one.
Yeah, true. The 6th one is Shea Vizsla or something, right? But that one,
Shea Vizsla, it's the APAC server.
Only server I haven't tried yet. I don't know. I think it's kind of dead.
I've never tried any non-English servers because I don't speak those languages.
Yeah.
But I did play on was it either Toffin or Red Eclipse before they merged everything into Darth Malgus. I was leveling some tunes over there. But I don't think I ever did any. Oh no, I take that back. One time I did transfer a tune to do solo ranked to Malgus in like 6.0. But
okay.
Not for very long.
Yeah.
Just like a couple months maybe.
Because the solo rank was more active there, or why?
Yeah, I mean, the competition was always a little bit better and a little more active on in EU, I think. Back it used to be when ranked was still a thing.
Yeah. Not sure. I mean, I never played on the US servers back then. But I think you mentioned you started playing in Rise of the Hutt Cartel, right? So the 2.01.
Yeah, so I leveled my first tune to 55, like right around when the Dread War, 2.4, the DFDP expansion or mini expansion came out. That's kind of when I got my first tune to max level. And I pretty much, I mean, I was already doing PvP while leveling. When I got to max level, I joined a raiding guild because I thought that's kind of what you're supposed to do.
Sure.
But after a couple months of that, I decided, no, I just want to do PvP full time.
Yeah.
And I pretty much decided also right away I wanted to main Carnage Marauder. Like in those days, it was not that good and also really difficult to play. So it was a struggle, but I really liked it. I liked the feel of it, and I liked thematically what it, the aesthetics and everything. So I just decided I was gonna main it and just stick with it, and I did that, and it's still like my main class today.
2.4. I'm trying to remember. I mean, it's hard to remember the class balance from back then, but at least in the beginning of like Arena, when they launched the first Arena seasons after they removed the 8v8 ranked, I think Carnage was very underrated, right? Because like everyone was playing Smash basically. Smash with a Fury Marauder was the flavor of the month, but Carnage actually had crazy burst, right? And there was this one Arena team on EU who kind of made the Deception and Carnage combo with the Jug Tank very popular and was just one-shotting everyone.
The Rowdy Zor team, right?
Exactly. Yep. And
then there was also SWTOR Rush, who played Carnage Marauder on a different team.
Oh yeah, I remember him as well. Yeah, he had the YouTube channel. Yeah, I watched those guys all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was fun. And I mean, just what I wanted to say. I guess it's arguable that Carnage was weak.
Yeah,
but I don't remember if that was 2.4. That was earlier, I think. Not sure.
Well, 2.4 was when arenas became like full release. They may have been early access before that, or on the PTS.
Mm-hmm.
But 2.4 was when arenas, like ranked arenas, launched, and they killed 8v8 ranked.
Okay.
That patch. Yeah. I mean, so like some general things that were going on, like Smash was still unnerfed, so it still worked as an AoE. PowerTech DPS had been buffed, but they didn't nerf they hadn't prevented you doing a flamethrower tank spec hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people were also doing that, where they would spec partially as a tank, but also get the superheated flamethrower from the middle tree, advanced prototype, and they were running that as the tank. That may have been more of an NA thing, but I remember that was pretty popular. But there was a patch where they
nerfed that. Yeah,
they nerfed it so you couldn't do both. Yeah.
I'm just looking at like the old skill tree.
Mm-hmm. The one from SWTOR Spy.
Exactly, the one that was in the last video.
In the video with Cease. Yeah, I was looking at that too. I think this one was from 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
So like actually when Rise of the Hutt Cartel launched, because there's a couple things in there that I noticed, like even these things were already different by the time I started playing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was some minor things, but I was just looking at like Marauder.
I'm just trying to see how high you can actually get. So if you want to take like the pulse generator, which I guess you want for the big
for the big
flamethrower thingy, you cannot get pulse engine because that's too high, but that would have been like OP as well.
Is that the one where it doubles the channel speed?
Yeah, exactly. That would have been a bit silly. So that wasn't possible. But I remember there was this build where you basically picked you went, I think, halfway up the tactics tree and halfway up the shield specialist or the shield tech if you played PowerTech. I played Vanguard actually back then, so I used to be a Republic main for I think maybe the first 2 years or something like that, but then switched over. But yeah, you can get. I think you could get like half up 2 trees basically. Like no, it's because I still have some points over here when I was playing with it earlier in Assault Specialist.
You could get up to Jet Charge and the prototype flamethrower.
Mm-hmm.
But can you get Flame Engine too if you take those points out of Pyrotech?
I have 3 left. No, you cannot. That's where it ends. Yeah, and that would have been probably a little bit strong. But yeah, you can get the leap. With the movement speed buff. What is this one? That one is not that good. I guess you want like the free tankiness from the tree, which was a nice thing for PowerTech. there was also like the build for Assassin, which was like a similar thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely probably want the oil slick. Oil slick and a jet charge from the tank tree.
For sure.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there was also now this may have already been nerfed by the time Arenas came out, or maybe it just wasn't relevant for Arenas, but there was the Vengeance Jug Tank hybrid where they could take CC immunity and also be a tank, and that was used.
Yeah, I played that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, you would take like you need Xian form for that, right? I think you needed like.
Well, that's how they nerfed it. You didn't used to need Xian form; you just needed the talent points.
Ah, okay.
You could stay in Suresu form and use guard, but still get the CC immunity, and then they tied it to the Xian form stance, and that killed the tank hybrid.
I remember playing Guardian tank, where you could stance, so you would switch from Suresu to Xian, and then just for the leap, Xian would give you still the stun immunity. The Unstoppable is called, exactly, yeah. The buff is still called Unstoppable. Just the talent is different now, right? While in Xian form, Force Charge has a chance to grant Unstoppable. Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure like when this.
So it was okay. So it was a dancing thing. Okay.
I'm not sure when it came out, but that's how I remember it, at least. That you needed to switch from Suresu to Xian. So you had like keybinds for the different forms, and you needed to do it in arenas. Well, quickly, of course, because you didn't want to get CC'd in Xian form. Because if they CC you before you leap, then you're super squishy even as a tank.
And also when you go to Xian form, guard just goes away, right? Like there is no guard. You have to be in Suresu, I think.
Maybe. I don't remember that, to be honest. I remember that back then, obviously, I think until pretty recently, right? DPS players could still guard. So there was a thing.
Yeah, in one of the expansions, maybe it was 5.0.
It was pretty late. I think Cease mentioned something like that, but
yeah, like in 5.0, I think they made it so that that guard was not tied to the stance at all, because they got rid of stances in 5.0. They just became a passive thing that you couldn't toggle. And I think they made it so DPS could just guard. Like if you were tank class, you could just guard. You didn't have to be tank spec.
Yeah, I was not a big fan of that. I mean, I wasn't playing, I think, when they made that change. But in general, not the biggest fan. I like to have more buttons on my bars somehow that I can press sometimes, just when I need them. Because sometimes you want to, maybe even if a DPS, right? If you're out of cooldowns and you're in a situation where you just need to survive, quickly switch to the tank form and maybe live until your healer respawns or something like that. I don't think that was a problem really, but probably I don't know. Maybe you had players who were running around without a stance because they clicked them off, or I'm not sure if that was even possible. But it's one of those things where I think like the game is getting easier and easier somehow, and that's a little bit a shame, in my opinion.
So I always like to have the stance because you could immediately look at somebody's buff bar and know what spec they were before they even did an ability. I always found that helpful, especially on those maps where you could look at them in the spawn, which is a lot of maps actually.
True.
You could just look at their buffs and see, oh, this guy's in, he's in Suresu. This is the tank.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's actually, in a way, something that now is harder. So.
Yeah, you have to look for other buffs.
Yeah.
Other passives that are exclusive to the tree.
Yeah, exactly. Need to know a little bit more about the classes.
I liked having the icon on your bar. It kind of gave you a connection to the spec you were playing in a way. Like that. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about my idea for if there was a SWTOR Classic, like kind of how I would want some of the things to work. So one of the things is I'm of the opinion that the way the classes were pre Shadow of Revan, so before 3.0, was just on the whole better than anything after that. So I would want to go back to a patch before Shadow of Revan. But I also recognize one of the issues, like we were just talking about, is like the way you could do these hybrid specs.
Yeah.
And some of them were it's just too many different things to balance, right? Like you're not just balancing for the specs that exist, you also have to then balance for specs that are unaccounted for. So my thought on this, I feel like it'd be pretty simple to do, is the game would basically force you to choose a primary spec. So you would have up to like all 46 of your points you could put in there if you want to. But you could you'd be able to put 10 points in the other two trees total. Mm-hmm. So like you'd have to put at least 36 points into your primary, because that's how many you need to get the ability all the way at the top.
Yeah.
Like your last ability. You'd have 10 free points. I mean, basically that would allow you to build any of what were, like the best in slot full builds at the time, and lock out any hybrids. So then, like if you wanted to change spec, you just have to click, like reset or change spec or something like that. So yeah, I wonder what you thought about that.
I mean, I think when I think like about the hybrid specs that come to mind, I'm not sure really how problematic they were. Like, I mean, there was basically the, PT that was super tanky, but, then again, you didn't have like the full damage tree all the way up, right? Right. And you had like you had the assassin. I'm just trying to like bring this up on my screen here, so I somehow see like what you had back then. You basically, I think you could get like the energize and the big shock, energize, the big shock, dark ward, that makes you a bit tankier, and maybe even all the way up to force pull, and then you would go into, I think, madness usually, so you could get like a death field on a tank, right? And you would have a little bit more, AoE pressure, I guess, on the tank. And there was another good spec, and I think the other one was like the dot smash Marauder that came a bit later, right?
Yeah. Well, that one was basically, it didn't really make any sense in PvP because just running full smash was pretty much more damage.
Yeah.
But for PvE, it did have really good sustain, so it was kind of broken in PvE.
Mm. Well, I don't know. I think, my take on this one was always that, I guess the way you could have balanced that was simply buffing the abilities all the way on the top of the tree, right? Let's say the kind of keystone abilities, right? Like if there's a reason people go into these hybrid specs is because, maybe the ability on top for whatever reason isn't all that great. I don't know. Let's look at some examples. You have maybe let's go back to Assassin. Assassin had, for example, Deception had Voltaic Slash all the way on top, right? Which is, it's just a filler ability. It's not the best. Right. Tank Assassin had Wither all the way on top, which is a good ability, but it's not, I guess, better than Death Field, right? So that's the trade-off, right? So I feel like, I feel like you could have balanced it around that somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. The thing with that, with the Dark Maul, is like you're double dipping on shock buffs. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in there, I'm not sure where it is in the tree, but somewhere in the Deception tree are those skill points that buff shock.
Yeah.
Those could easily be moved up the tree.
That would be one option. Yeah, you move the talents around.
Yeah.
But in general, I think I always liked the option to have like a hybrid spec in there, because it was part of, being more creative, I guess. With, how you wanted to, you have kind of these three paths that you can choose from. And, I guess, you could, if you wanted to focus on shock because, you just wanted to have the build that has the highest possible shock crits in the game, or for whatever reason, that was the ability that you wanted to play around, then you could do that, right? And now you can't really do that, right? Like if I want to build a Deception Assassin that focuses on, having really high shock damage and discharge damage. I cannot really, because there's no Crackling Blast talent that I can take, which gives you crazy critical strike damage.
Right.
And Chain Shock, I guess, is a passive, right? So all Deception Assassins are kind of the same. And the only thing you can really do is, everyone plays with Shadowcraft anyway. And the only thing can vary is maybe the tactical, right? For, 2 cloaks, or if you want to have AoE, you use May Cause Injury or something else, right? So, but there's not so much way that you can experiment and kind of fine-tune the classes, which is what I liked actually more about the old skill trees.
Yeah, I feel like so yeah, I'd agree with you actually about the hybrid specs were not as much of a balancing issue as people on the forums would want you to believe. Like, I feel like complaints about it were overstated.
Yeah, if you take the forums as a guideline for anything, then that's probably not the best idea. But
yeah,
it seems that the developers at least agreed, right? Because in Shadow of Revan, then they launched like the disciplines, so complete revamp of the skill tree. You basically had this one path that you were going up with abilities that you got until level 60 was the cap then. So pretty similar to how the tree works nowadays. Just that back then you had these 3 tiers of utilities that you could pick from. So the idea, you have a core spec. Those will all have kind of the same buffs and so on. And then you have some utilities where, you have to pick 3 on the first tier and then 3 on the second tier and so on. So a little bit of a different idea, but that means that you could not, for example, combine the core talents of an advanced prototype with a PowerTech, for example. So that kind of killed all the hybrids. So it seems that the developers somehow agreed that was a problem.
It also seems like that change and a lot of subsequent patch, like major class changes, they're trying to dumb the game down, like trying to make it easier so you have less chance to do the wrong thing, like use the wrong abilities or whatever. They keep doing that over and over again, removing different abilities. I've never really liked that that philosophy because I feel like you want to balance the game and design the game for the players that are really invested in the combat system and really learn it. And I feel like the people that couldn't figure out how to play their spec when there were skill trees, it's not an issue with the tree system. It's more an issue with them. And like,
sure,
I still see people with the current skill system, which is, drastically simplified from what it was back in 2.x. I still see people like leveling tunes on streams where they're like level 45 and they're using one ability like vicious slash or like sweeping slash on for every attack.
Sure.
It seems like the people that don't really want to learn or aren't going to learn or become good, they'll always be there, and you can't change them by simplifying the game. Like, they are who they are. So it's kind of a lost cause.
Yeah, I'm just trying to like fly over here kind of what they were saying, why they removed the old skill trees. But it comes basically down to what you were saying, right? They were saying they just wanted to have the system easier. Full stop. That's for me the core message, right? Our goal was to design an elegant system that brings forward class identity without sacrificing the challenge of mastering your role in the process. Okay. Don't really know what that means, but that was when they introduced advanced classes. Exactly. Once you're level 10, path is automatically chosen. Okay. Why the change? So what they were basically saying is in the patch notes or in the developer blog for 3.0 Shadow of Revan, that the old skill trees appear on the surface to provide flexibility, but in reality, they didn't. Players of a skill tree all tend to take the same skills in roughly the same order with only minor variations. Oh, that's arguable. I mean, that has always been the case.
I don't really agree with that, actually.
Yeah. I mean, there's the fact that people came up with these hybrids and were creative. Already kind of tells you that you had more options back then, right? I mean, of course, back then there were also YouTubers and guides on the forum, and people were copying what other people were doing. I mean, that has been a thing for many years. But I mean, if anything, then disciplines gave you less options, not more. So it doesn't really make sense what they're saying here in this class guide here.
Yeah, well, they got rid of skill trees, and then they came in with what are they called? Utility talents.
Yeah.
They came in with utility talents where some of them were so bad and others were so good that then they really did make it so where there was very little choice.
Exactly. This is a very good point. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, to the point what you said earlier with I guess it's a discussion of, skill floor, like how easy is it to learn the class, and then kind of the skill cap. How much can you kind of optimize it once you have learned it to, get that last, I don't know, 10% of performance out of the class, right? To like really master it. And I think the game at launch certainly wasn't perfect, right? But I don't know. I mean, you can take Carnage as an example. I guess it was a class that, like you said, it was relatively difficult to learn, I would say, because you needed to kind of use your abilities in the right order. Because if you didn't, the damage was very, very burst heavy, very centered around your Goa windows, and there were even like little tricks you could do, canceling Ravage, for example, to get an additional hit into the Goa window where you had your 100% armor penetration. So Carnage was actually one of those specs that were relatively hard to learn. And then there were also things you could do to master it, to get a little bit more out of it, right? So relatively high skill ceiling, but also the mastery, the cap was kind of high as well. And I guess there were always other classes which are relatively easy to learn, like, I don't know, Arsenal Mercenary, for example, right? I think there was never a point in the game where Arsenal was considered the hardest spec to learn. It was always about, tracer missile, big heat seeker, go boom. And then at some point they introduced, blazing bolts when there was unload before and so on. And there's things you can do. I wouldn't say Arsenal is like a super beginner class because, let's say not only for beginners, because, you do have off-heals, you have CC, you have cleanse that you can. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. You're like a really good Arsenal player. But it's sort of an example of a class that's very beginner friendly, easy to learn, but you can actually get better at it for a long time. And with 3.0, I mean, I guess another thing they did with 3.0 is also introduce the whole dot spread thing, right? Which also wasn't a thing before. So before you had Smash, which, was like basically was the meta class that everyone was playing because the Smash was hitting so hard. If you got like 3 Smash Marauders, they could basically like one-shot your whole team in a couple of seconds because Smash was critting so hard. And eventually they nerfed them. I didn't really know in what patch that was, but I remember 3.0 was the patch where they introduced the dot spreads. And back then they were, even a lot more powerful than they are nowadays, right? Like Death Field had, for example, an 8-meter radius instead of a 5-meter radius like nowadays. So a lot of the dot spreads when they came out were really overpowered.
And on Assassin, when it came out, Death Field was their dot spreader too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Assassin also had Phase Walk. Like that's another thing I think I really miss from the earlier expansions. In Rise of the Hutt Cartel and also Shadow of Revan, I think they introduced new abilities, right? Or at least they shuffled around some abilities. Eventually, like Assassin lost Phase Walk and it went to Sorcerer, and then later the Sniper got a Phase Walk. And I guess now Mercenary is the only ranged class that cannot Phase Walk for some reason. But so there were new abilities introduced. Abilities were shuffled around a little bit, which kind of kept the game fresh, right? Like all of a sudden, Sorcerer had their barrier, which super changed the meta, in my opinion. Not for the better, but yeah, that's arguable because Sorcerer kind of became the hard counter to this to these arena burst teams. But that's something I really miss. Like the last expansions just feels like we're losing abilities for sure in 7.0. They removed a bunch of stuff, especially I guess you know what I'm talking about as a Marauder main. But yeah, that's something I wish they would revert, because, and I guess that's my whole point. The idea of yes, you can have classes that are easy to learn. That's fine. But then at the same time, I think it's nice if you have situational abilities that you can use sometimes. And, even though it's not part of your core rotation, maybe you use it only once per war zone. In that situation, maybe it gets you a kill or it helps you survive a little bit longer. And that's something that, the more experienced players can use to, just get that one foot up on maybe a good but not that experienced player, right? So a way of skill expression. And I feel like removing a lot of these abilities kind of takes away from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like, for example, for my spec, in 2.x and earlier, I'll tell you the abilities that spec had access to that it didn't have access to starting for 3.x. We had Deadly Throw, which was a 10-meter throw lightsaber ability that put a trauma debuff. That was available to all 3 specs. As Carnage, you could spec into a 3-second root on it. So that was really nice control skill move for PvP. It was never something you'd use for your damage rotation, but it was there to use the trauma debuff or the root if you're Carnage. We had access to Rupture. So Rupture is the dot ability from the Annihilation tree now. It used to be available to all 3 specs. And again, this is an ability where, like, if you were playing your strict Carnage rotation, you wouldn't use it typically, but in PvP, you could use it to put a dot on somebody. And there were, useful cases for that.
Sure.
We had Retaliation, which was off the global cooldown. Just a little extra buff of damage if you, like, parried somebody. And then there was one other one that I'm blanking on, I think. So I kind of feel like Marauder specifically got more ability pruning in 3.0 than it did in 7.0, which is kind of crazy to say.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case for most classes.
Yeah, I don't remember much. Like, I tried to check the patch notes for 3.0 because I did play back then, but when did that come out? That was 2014.
There were a lot of changes that weren't announced in the patch notes too. Like they nerfed the damage of Ravage by about like 50%, and they reduced the cooldown to 18 seconds. That was never announced in any patch notes before 3.0 dropped or when it dropped. It was just a stealth change, but everybody that played warrior classes noticed immediately, like, that Ravage didn't hit anywhere nearly as hard as it did before the patch.
Yeah, that's a shame, because that for me is like, that was the iconic ability for basically for all of the Jedi Knight and warrior classes, but especially for Carnage, that was the one that you needed to react to, otherwise you were in big trouble, because it would eat half of your health pool basically. Yeah. And at some point they made it so it roots as well, or at least gave you the option to root.
Yeah, I think it was in the original, maybe not at the game at launch, but sometime during the 1.x patches, I think they added the skill points where you could put that root on Ravage to Carnage. It was like the perfect. It was a balanced ability, right? Because if you didn't interrupt it, you would take massive damage, but there were multiple ways that it could be countered.
I think
because it was a channel.
I think the last tick was hitting harder, right? So the animation had, I think, 3 ticks of damage. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't do something on the last tick would hit you pretty hard. So I always remember that, you needed to pop a defensive or, I don't know, force push before the 3rd tick hits you, basically. I mean, ideally, of course, earlier, but, it's sometimes hard when you get rooted by it. Which is another thing that was cool, you had, if you knew that, then you could outplay it.
Right.
And if you didn't know that, you would get hit very hard. And on Carnage, there was then this mini game that, you try to get all 3 ticks through, of course, for maximum damage, right? And maybe if you play with the tank would hard stun. And then you have two Carnage Marauders doing 2 Ravages with Gore and just one shot whatever target is there, right? So we back at the time we were playing on the German server, and there were not so many teams, but we were one of the teams that were playing Arena then. And let's say our Marauders, they were okay. We had one of them who was going crazy all the time, just popping maximum damage, maximum DPS, and we had one who was kind of holding back, and he was always on the bottom of the DPS charts, But he was saying, I'm waiting to do the important damage, and he would do the important damage in his defense. When we would do our hard swap, I was the tank. I would call it, okay, we go now. Someone would fear, I would hard stun, and he would jump in. He saved all of his cooldowns. He saved all of his bursts for that moment. And then would just one shot someone. So that was the game plan. One of them would do the pressure, and the other one would do the important damage. Yeah,
I kind of feel like so that was the meta, like getting the hard swap. That was like the meta for a while when Arenas first came out, and then I feel like you can tell me if your experience was different. I feel like when I think it was 2.8, they buffed Madness Sorcerer and they buffed Hatred Assassin at the same time. And maybe not right away, but eventually people started figuring out that running those 2 specs together and just like forgetting the whole hard swap thing and just going for pure pressure damage was an equally effective tactic. And that kind of changed the game. And kind of the game went away from just being about hard swaps after that. And it kind of never stopped, because after that in 3.0 we got dot spreading, and so like pressure continued to be kind of the dominant meta, I think.
I'm trying to think when did they take Phase Walk away from assassins and gave it to sorcerers?
Yeah, so that was in 5.0. So 4.0 was this weird.
Was that late, really? Was it that late? Phase Walk.
Well, yeah, but 5.0 released in 2016, so it's it's coming up on 8 years ago now.
Yeah, I remember 2.8 because I think that was the patch you mentioned, right, where they buffed Hatred, and they completely overbuffed it. So the single target was actually crazy. There was no dot spread yet, but the single target damage was so crazy that you could kill a healer in a couple of seconds solo, just with your dots and resets. That was insane. And then they nerfed it in 3.0. They nerfed the single target, but they of course introduced the dot spread.
Right.
And I don't know if that was in 3.0, but I remember a time where everyone was just playing Hatred in arenas as well. Basically, the solo rank was full of Hatred Assassins and Serenity Shadows, because you had the big dot spread. You were, relatively tanky even back then. It wasn't that much of an issue. I'm not quite sure what was the difference there compared to nowadays, but everyone was playing it. It was the number 1 DPS class. Mm-hmm. And also in group ranked arenas, people were just playing like a PT tank and two Hatred Assassins basically, and then just full AoE cleave. That was kind of the meta, at least on the German server, and then later when we transferred to the EU server, was the same thing. People just running like a full AoE cleave and just do as much AoE damage as possible. And at the same time, like there was a switch also on the healer side. I think like more people were switching from, like in the beginning you had I think operatives being more popular, right? Because they were a little bit more offensive. when it comes to, maybe doing like an exfiltrate, going to the arena with your whole team in stealth, right? Which is not really a thing nowadays anymore. So you could get like a good opener, and then Operative had actually a lot of off damage as well, good DPS as well, had like a low cooldown hard stun. But then at some point people switched to Sorcerer. And of course, Sorcerer had gotten the bubble in, I think 2.0, they got the bubble, right?
Yeah, that was their level 55.
Which is basically like a big counter to the hard swap comp, because you kind of need to kill sorcerers three times now, right? They kind of have 3 lives because, first they can, first the tank would break the first CC, and then they get guarded, they survive. And then on the second hard swap, the sorcerer can break and use a knockback and run away, medpack. So they would survive. And then on the third hard swap, now they have bubble. So you kind of have to hard swap 4 times on a sorcerer. Because they got the bubble, and that changed the meta a lot, because by the time you get to your 4th hard swap, you need to wait for your cooldowns. For the people maybe that don't know how that works, basically it means that either the tank or one of your DPS would do like a CC, trying to CC the other tank and as many of the DPS players of the enemy team, and then maybe you would hard stun either like in the healer or an unguarded DPS. But the tricky part is, if you want to swap on a DPS, then the sorcerer can simply cleanse the tank, right? So can cleanse the CC from the tank, and now your tank can guard, and your hard swap is ruined. So because of that reason, you kind of want to swap on the healer, and if the healer is playing sorcerer, and now he also has a bubble, you need to kind of kill them, or try to kill them 3 or 4 times unless they make a mistake, which just made it very hard. And then people swap to basically from these kind of burst-oriented setups, which I at least thought were way more fun and skilled to play, to just kind of disturb meta, which we see, even nowadays, you just do maximum AoE damage, and then whoever has the better DPS and HPS wins the game.
Yeah, maybe that's a good segue into kind of how the game is now. Because I listened when you're talking with Cease, you guys were talking about how there's just too much damage going out in general relative to people's ability to survive and or like healers' ability to heal it. And I agree with that. I think, but my feeling on it is, because I came from, back in 2.x when single target time to kill was really, really low. Like you could burst somebody down really fast, and I thought that was fun. So I like that part of it. I think the issue for me, the thing that I don't like, is just the amount of splash damage that's able to go out from so many different specs, like just at all times. Like the thing with APPT, where when you refresh retractable blade on somebody, it just splashes out a dot in like a 8-meter radius that can crit for like 20k damage, just free damage.
It's 5 meters, but
5 meters.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's 5 meters. 8 meters would be really OP, but it's 5.
It's just like one thing where it's like there's just damage going out to multiple targets that you're not even targeting just because. I guess.
Yeah.
It just silly stuff like that it takes no skill to do that, right? Like all you have to do is hit your buttons and you will have free extra damage on every player around. And I feel the same way about like dot spreading. Like I never really liked the fact that dot spreading was a thing.
Me neither.
I just feel like it puts too much damage on too many people. And what you get is like, what we have now, we're like, there's just too much pressure damage all the time. And so it's hard to stay alive. Healers like definitely can't keep up. And it's just not, it doesn't require like a lot of coordination and a lot of team play and skill. It's just you hit your buttons and you do lots of free DPS.
Yeah, and it's basically whoever positions better will win, right? Because if the enemy team, for whatever reason, stacks, with 5 people in like a choke point, and you have, I don't know, a Vengeance Jug. Okay, maybe that's not the biggest meta class, right? But let's say you're running pyro, virulence, lethality, you get 1 dot spread off into 5 people, the enemy healer is never going to catch up. Even if you have 2 healers, in AoE situations, like lethality is doing 40,000 DPS, vengeance is doing 50,000 DPS. Healers can't even keep up with that. So AoE DPS and kind of this dot spread pressure DPS is really outpacing AoE, healing that you can do. That's the 1 point, I think. So yeah, to what you said. In some games where we're playing, maybe, when we play against another premade, of course, we also try to play the good classes. We will play, madness, virulence, and maybe pyro. And you don't even need to communicate, right? Like, you don't need to say, oh, I'm going to stun this guy. And first of all, it's probably a sniper, so you can't stun him anyway. But there's not that much communication really needed, because you're just watching health bars. You're trying to target whatever is in front of you. If you're not rooted, you try to target whatever you can hit. Especially if you're playing a melee, right? You're just happy if you can move these days. And it's just try to maximize every button to do as much DPS as possible and hope the other team falls over, right? And if they ever make a mistake with positioning, you try to jump in there and carbonize 5 people, which gives you like the upper hand. And that's kind of it. And then the Zerg moves forward or backwards, depending on whoever has the pressure, has the upper hand. And as you move closer to your respawn, then maybe you can have a chance to kind of push them back. And that's kind of how it goes. Whoever has the better damage at the end of the day will win the match in 90% of the cases. And but at the same time, I think also that burst DPS is also too strong not compared to the HP pools, because like you said, in the early expansions, you actually had more burst in the game than nowadays, compared to like how much damage you can do compared to how much HP people have. That was faster back then, but now we have stronger defensive cooldowns, first of all, than we used to have when the game launched, right? Because now there is phase walk, which wasn't a thing in the classic version of the game, and now there are sorcerers also have barrier, so they have 3 lives at least. That's without a guard, and mercenaries have reflect or responsive safeguards, which wasn't a thing back then, right? So there's more powerful cooldowns. People have more HP compared to the burst you can do, but still, I would say that burst damage is like single target burst damage is probably a bit too strong, because the healers cannot keep up with it either, right? Like if you have 3 DPS players focusing you, there's nothing your healer can do. You're just gonna chain die, and they don't have the same powerful cooldowns that I guess DPS classes have, right? Something like an explosive fuel, which probably like doubles your DPS as a power tech. Healers don't have that. Like even polarity shift, which I guess is the best of all of them, it doesn't push your HPS as crazy as the burst cooldowns do. So and that's, I think, like what I talked about with Sith also. If there were some cooldowns in the game where a healer can react a little bit better to that, and try to save a DPS as getting focused, I think that would also make the game a little bit more balanced. Because right now, in at least the games that I play, when you have like 2 premates facing off, it's either one of those like pressure matches where both teams have 2 healers and a tank and are kind of surviving, and then slowly one team gets pushed back because the healers cannot keep up with the pressure. Or it's a complete stomp where one side just has like 3 PTs and they have so much burst that the tank cannot guard 2 players at the same time, and then just everyone gets kind of one shot. And then once everyone got one shot, they go to respawn, then the rest of the team gets one shot as well. So it's either like a stomp or like a slow grind. But I don't know. Maybe I just have rose-colored glasses, because for sure, like back then in the classic days, not everything was perfect with the game either. But at least that's my experience.
Yeah, I mean, another thing with because you were talking about positioning, like one team positioning better, and that's who wins the pressure battle. There's another factor there, and that is if one team has 4 melee and the other team has 2 melee and 2 ranged, the team with 2 melee, if you're playing like a dot spreading match, the team with 2 melee and 2 range is gonna obviously come out on top because their 2 range can move out of the dot spread.
Yeah.
That's a thing that because as a melee main, that's another thing I don't like about dot spreading. It disproportionately punishes melee players because you don't have the freedom of positioning that ranged players have. You have to go where your target is.
Yeah.
So you have no choice but to get caught in dot spreads a lot of times, whereas range can just stand in a different spot.
Yeah, exactly. That's another issue. I mean, I probably will update my tier list pretty soon, even though nothing has changed in terms of balance since the last one I did in 7.4. There was 0 changes, right?
Right.
But
as it has been for multiple patches now. 0 class changes, I think.
I mean, there were some changes from 7.3 to 7.4, like very minor ones, I think. Let me quickly bring it up. In 7.4, isn't there something here? Sniper Gunslinger. Yeah, Sniper Gunslinger got slightly nerfed. Juggernaut got a slight change, and Pyrotech, the tactical, got nerfed for Pyro. So there were at least some changes, but now now the only justification I have to make more tier lists is basically the meta shifting, at least on Darth Malgus, where I mostly play, right? Because everyone on that server has rerolled to Sniper now for some reason. Everyone is playing Virulence or NG. It's crazy. Like I run in there and I just get chain CC'd and chain dotted by like 50 snipers that you cannot pull and you cannot leap to. And I mean, I don't want to complain too much because actually AP is one of the few classes that are actually good against snipers. But yeah, we played a match the other day where it was, 7-man premade versus 7-man premade. And I think I wasn't the only melee DPS. There was a Deception Assassin who was very sad and standing around the whole time, rooted by like 3 snipers. But I think the enemy team had 2 healers and 2 Madness Assassin, 2 Madness Sorks and 2 Virulent Snipers. So that was the setup. No, I think there was another guy, I forget, but they basically were only sticking ranged, and our team was also mostly ranged players. Because melee is just, for some of the reasons that you mentioned, it's quite hard to play. There's so many like slows in the game that are like randomly flying around. If you play against Madness, right, every 9 seconds you get rooted by Creeping Terror. And then they have, the AoE knockback, which roots you for another 2 seconds. Snipers, of course, also have a knockback that comes with a baked-in root. Then there's that. Don't even get me started on like Arsenal Mercs. I mean, sure, they have the net, but then the 70% slow on Blazing Bolts killed me the other day. I was so mad because he's so slow, you can't do shit, right? Like you have 35 seconds cooldown on hydraulic overrides. That's so long, 35 seconds, right? If you like waste that once, you're never getting out of a melee. Like you're never escaping. So as a melee player, it's kind of a rough situation if everyone switches to the ranged classes. And that's probably why I updated tier list as well, because there's really only maybe Pyro and AP a little bit that can kind of compete with the snipers and the dot sork, I guess. But it's a rough time to be a marauder or a juggernaut main right now, I think.
Yeah, and AP is arguably one of the specs that has too much burst for the game.
Oh yeah, has the best burst in the game. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to burst healing and being able to keep up with the burst, I feel like as far as that really high burst goes, there's not that many specs where it's a big issue. It's mostly engineering snipers explosive probe. If their explosive probe didn't crit for 100k and it was just a normal ability that crit for like 50 or 60k, I think they would be all right. I don't think it would be broken. And AP, I feel like the most broken thing is that you can do an energy burst and then instantly pop
power yield
and do another one. I think if power yield just didn't grant the 4 stacks, I feel like that would actually make a big difference, and they would still have sick burst, but it wouldn't be like 90k, right? Like
sure. I mean, the big thing they did was in 7.0, they put the auto crit on power yield. So it's like now a passive effect, where previously you needed to use a tactical for that, right?
Right.
So energy burst is always critting. So unless you're popping a cooldown, it's going to hit you for at least 70k, right? And that's very strong. But like I said, I mean, I think it's good that there's a lot of burst in the game, because otherwise the game would just be pressure and spreading dots and slowly killing people over like 5 minutes. The issue is if healers cannot really do anything about it, right? So because back in the day you had even crazier burst than what AP has now, right? Like AP maybe does, I don't know. I did some videos on that, trying to see like how much burst can you fit into like a hard stun in 3 seconds, right? And it's a lot. Like you can definitely one shot someone in 4 seconds, especially if you have multiple PTs. But why don't you give a healer the opportunity to do some similar crazy burst heals, right? Like, I don't know, in World of Warcraft arenas, for example, you have some very powerful cooldowns. You can give other players immunity, right? Or you can give them damage reduction. Or you just have a cooldown that bursts, that buffs your burst healing, I don't know, by, let's say, 30-40% for a couple of seconds, right? So you can kind of counterplay that burst. And then it's a game about how I think it should be, trading your cooldowns, right? The PTs pop their cooldowns, so you pop a cooldown, and then whoever kind of gets the most value out of their cooldowns, by the time they come up again, will win the round. Kind of similar to how WoW arenas are played at a higher level, I think, right? So I don't necessarily think like AP burst is such a big problem. Of course, it's also my main spec, right? I actually would say like you need to buff the burst of a couple of other specs, and especially then buff the healers. That would be more fun in my experience, because we had this one day where they messed up something with the bolster, right? There was this bolster bug. I'm not sure if you were playing when that happened. That's the one I talked about with Sith in the last podcast. When you could, there was some. You would remove your modifications basically, and only leave an augment and a color crystal in your weapon. And then you would have, depending on what crystal, either like 1 million HP, or you would have 20,000 bonus damage or something like this. And the burst was crazy. You would just crit for 200k all the time, and basically two-shot people. And that maybe I would say was maybe a little bit much burst, but it was the most fun I had in this game for a long time. So I think if they make a game a little bit more spiky, but give the healers a chance to fight that, to react, that could be fun. I mean, for sure, more fun than slowly rotting away while you're standing somewhere, getting chain rooted by 5 Madness Orcs.
Yeah, well, I think what has happened is if you kind of look at the trajectory of the way the game has gone since 3.0, patch over patch over time, 3 things have been happening. So the first thing is like the inherent base damage of all abilities relative to the player's health pools has been going down. So like the way you get high damage is through buffs and tacticals and set bonuses. Like those are the things that give you the big burst. The base damage it used to be like the base damage of a lot of things hit really hard. But now it's not like that anymore. Like your basic attack or your basic energy spender, rage spender doesn't do a lot of damage. The things that do a lot of damage are things that are like super critted by multiple buffs.
Yeah.
And so the way it used to work was base abilities did a lot of damage and base healing abilities did a lot of healing. So you could crit for 10k, but the healers like Dark Infusion, like that was the long cast, like the 2-second cast for Sork Healer, that could crit for 10k. And Healing Scan from Mercular could crit for 10k. So over time, these big abilities that are getting all these buffs, offensive abilities that are getting these buffs to make these huge crits, like Explosive Probe right now or Energy Burst, that damage keeps going up, or at least staying the same compared to how much health people have. But the healer abilities, because the base damage or base healing is going down, those haven't received those buffs.
Yeah.
So like what you're talking about is you need some type of tacticals, passives, set bonus, whatever, so that they can buff up their big heals and hit those big burst heals that they used to be able to hit just because heals inherently did a lot of healing.
Yeah, like if you look at the biggest heals after a match, right, and you compare them to the biggest hits that DPS are doing, like it's night and day. I mean, you have when I played Sorcerer the other day, or now I'm working on the operative healing guide, right? And your biggest hits are maybe, I don't know, 60, 70k, something like that. Like the biggest heals that you can do. And there's maybe some examples where it can go higher, but it will usually be like a mercenary who gets a really big, how's it called? Trauma regulators, I think, on the shield, right? When they hit into your shield, and then you get like a big 120k heal. So that counts. I mean, but that's not really a heal because you can only apply it on yourself and only if enemies are stupid enough to hit you into it. But yeah, if you're just like casting like your big heal, and even if it crits, right, which is also not a given because there's not so many auto crits for healers, then maybe that heals, I don't know, 30% of someone's HP, right? And at the same time, energy probe, I think my biggest crit was 181k or something like that, right? And that comes at the same time as EMP discharge, so you have half your health pool gone, right? So that's 2 to 3 times what a healer can do with their big heal, in air quotes, right? APPT, you can get 100k thermal detonator, and then you have an auto crit energy burst, which is also like usually 200k combo, right? Like all the time. Like the only thing that needs to happen is thermal detonator needs to crit, so that's like a 40% chance, maybe a bit higher. And, then that's half someone's health bar gone, like all the time. But healers don't have that. Like healers, yeah, I mean, if you get like a 60k, that's a pretty, decent crit, I would say. So I don't know where that went wrong, but yeah, in some patch there's for sure like a power gap there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know if any of the healing specs actually have an auto crit on a big heal. Some of them have like an auto crit on a smaller heal. Like not one where it makes enough of a difference to do anything about the burst.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Mercenary has I think an auto crit on the small and the instant heal. Yeah. Oh, forget about the name.
I think Stork they can talent into like an auto crit on dark heal,
which is your small heal. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's not dark. It's not dark infusion. Like you need dark infusion to have a giant crit to have your burst heal.
Yeah, something like that I think would help. And I mean, operative, I think the biggest issue for operative is that they just don't have very good defensive cooldowns compared to the other 2 healers. So they're just so squishy. They do have an auto crit, but it's, I think, on the emergency med pack, which is your like small instant heal. So yeah, it's not the best either. Exactly. So if they just kind of gave, I think, healers the same ability to burst, maybe to have some super crits like DPS players do, then you could do some. As a healer, I think you would feel a little bit more powerful, because right now I think all the time I play healer, if you don't have a tank, then the enemy team has 2 good DPS players, and you just watch your teammates die. Like even if you position properly, you're not really being an easy target. So maybe the team doesn't go for you, but just kills your teammates one after another, and there's not much you can do because you cannot keep up with the burst. So that's the worst thing. It feels really good if you maybe have some, dots on your team, you can slowly heal them. But yeah, if there's 2 APPTs bursting your DPS, then you have a very bad time as a healer, and it's not very fun.
Yeah. So a couple months ago, before they kind of left the game and I left the game, I ran a lot of arenas with with some other players, and we found that our best winning comp was actually tank and 3 DPS. We had more success with that than if we had a healer, and we would beat teams that had tank and healer with that comp that were also full premades.
Yeah, for sure.
Like that's how overtuned deep damages compared to healing. Like it was almost not even almost better to not have a healer in arena.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, because you really just as a healer, you cannot keep up with the burst, right? So I mean, we had a couple of matches also where we played 3 DPS and a healer, just simply because one of our guildmates is actually 2 of them are healer mains. They don't play really anything other than healers. But for sure, you can win with healer 3 DPS versus like a tank and healer setup. But I think I say this all the time, like 3 DPS and a tank, I think is stronger than 3 DPS and a healer. Like if all players are equally skilled, sure. Because the tank basically can also do 10k DPS in arena, if there's AOE even more. And that means, if you have 3 good DPS players and a capable tank, can't really burst anyone because the tanks live so long, they can easily take 1 million damage or more. 50% of whoever you're trying to burst is going to go to the tank, so you can't really burst anyone. And then it's just a race against time, right? But since you have less DPS, you're going to be on the back foot if you're the team with a healer. And the other team is going to have so much pressure, like they're going to have, let's say 50,000 DPS between those 3 DPS players and the tank, that is just overwhelming. And, if you have some specs that maybe have a little bit of off heal, have some cooldowns where they can maybe reset the fight and recover, something like a Deception Assassin, even the Marauder, if you stealth out and you can sometimes, recover, you come back in and you don't even need the healer in some situations, right? And typically it's whoever gets the first kill in arena wins. And that's what I've been saying in all of my videos pretty much. Damage is king right now.
Yeah, we would play I would play Carnage, NG Sniper, a tank would sometimes be PT, sometimes be Beyond Jug. It didn't really matter, just having the tank as long as they could guard swap. And then also the other DPS didn't really matter that much as long as they were doing like at least 10k DPS. It was mostly down to like me and the sniper. Just between the 2 of us, we had so much burst that we could just nuke somebody once we were through 1 or 2 cooldowns, and the healer couldn't do anything. Without a tank to put a guard on someone, we could just nuke someone. Yeah. And that was GG.
Yeah, I mean, the counter to that is having a good tank and a healer on the other team. I mean, for sure, that's stronger. If they're all playing well, the tank is swapping guard to whoever gets bursted by the NG Carnage combo. And the healer is doing a proper job with, not standing in random AoE and stuff, and not, no one is line of sighting him, then for sure the team should win. But it's not that clear as it might seem, right? For sure, the team with 3 DPS and tank can win more than you would think, simply by overwhelming the other team with DPS. For sure, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk about a bit also about like the matchmaking topic, right? You said you have some thoughts on that one, because obviously the thing that the developers kind of snuck into was 7.2, wasn't it? The PvP revamp patch.
Ranked, right? Yeah.
When they removed ranked, and at the same time they stealthily, like they never really mentioned it, but it was, I think, in the patch notes. No, it wasn't even the patch notes. It was in some blog somewhere, I think.
Like a forum post, I think. Probably.
Yeah, something, where they mentioned, okay, now you can, operation groups of up to 8 players can now queue for Warzones. Which was I made a video already, like on the day when, even before the patch came out, right? As soon as they announced that and said, hey, that's super stupid and it's going to be really bad for PvP. Since then, I had some more thoughts on it. But just wondering what you think about the whole matchmaking situation since then.
Yeah, so I don't know how it is on the German servers or the EU servers, but on Starforge, because of the way the population is, a lot of times, if there is a group, if there's a match with a group in it, 4 players or more, they're the only team that has that. And that team, that group, those 3 or 4 DPS that they have are so dominant that the match is completely one-sided. So if they are in queue, any game that contains that group is not going to be fun for, well, maybe it's fun for the people stomping the other team, but for anybody else in the game, including other people on their team, it's probably not going to be a very fun game. The game isn't going to be competitive in any sense of the word. And all it takes is like 3 or 4 competent players grouping up together and the other team not having that, and the game is completely broken. It gets even worse if you get 5 or 6 players in a group. There really isn't the population where you can have 5 or 6 player teams going against each other. At least that's been my experience on Starforge. I don't know what's the pop like on EU for like multiple big groups.
It depends. I mean, like I said, the other day we did have some matches where we went. I think the first one was like 8 versus 7, and then the second one was 7 versus 7. So sometimes we do have 2 groups forming, basically, who of course then will go against each other. And that's, I think, one thing that people maybe criticize without really knowing how it works about the matchmaking is that if there are 2 groups in queue, which 2 8-man groups, they will almost always get matched against each other if they're in queue right at the same time. So that is actually working. That the issue is, like you said, when there's one big group, let's say 6+ players, and that's the only group that's in queue, which I'm not sure how often that happens because we don't really do it anymore because, as you said, it's usually quite unfun because, first of all, like people need to understand if you queue in a, let's say, 6, 7, 8-man pre-made, even just a 5-man, right? The matchmaking will try to find like an equally large group that you play against. But if there's no one else in queue or with another big group, then you will just sit there for 10 minutes and wait. And eventually after 10, maybe sometimes 15 minutes, the game will just say, okay, fuck it. We'll just throw you into a game against like random players, right? And you'll maybe play against like a 3-man pre-made and then 5 randoms, right? And I mean, that in itself would not necessarily be an issue if there was, let's say, a large enough pool of skilled players to pick from, right? But the really big issue is that, of course, it's not just that you're playing in a 6-man pre-made, it's that, that those are 6 people which you handpick. You know that they are all good. They have all played this game for many years. They know their class. They know all the other classes. And they're going up against, Space Barbary 123 on the other team who's maybe wants to try out the PvP for the season for the first time, right? So, and then it's going to be a stomp, which is why we don't really. It's not fun for the 6-man pre-made because you need to wait forever. Then you have a game which is not a challenge. You're just rolling over the other team, and then you're going to wait in queue 10 minutes again, right? So. We did that like once when the patch came out, just to kind of make a video and show how stupid it is, and there was that. But yeah, for sure, what I noticed is there is some groups on Darth Malgus who sometimes they make like a 6, 7, 8-man pre-made, and they will kind of sit in queue and farm all the smaller pre-mates. And sometimes if that happens, then we form a group and try to play against them, just to kind of police the server. Or I mean, it's also fun to play against another bigger pre-made. But yeah, as you said, there is usually not enough players that can happen like on a regular basis. So yeah, that's at least how it is on Darth Malgus most of the time, which is where I play 90% of the days. That's the situation. But I think there used to be 8v8 ranked back in the day, right? In the launch of the game, or quickly after they introduced that patch where you had ranked Warzones basically, and that was actually also quite fun. Like I played in that back then. I was like really bad, so I was happy if I got like a spot on the team, or at least on the second team in my guild, because back then there was big guilds, of hundreds of players. Who had even multiple ranked teams going. And then that system was working because, at any given time, you had maybe 50, 60 or more than 100 people in, 5 or 6 teams queuing on the server. So you would always find another 8-man group to go up against, but you were guaranteed that you would also play against another 8-man premade, right? And then usually it was, everyone was in the same guild as well, and it was basically premade matches, premade versus premade with that's how the ranked Warzones worked, right? Everyone would super try hard, play the objectives, and actually try to win the game. And that was fun as well, but that worked because back then the player pool was big enough, and there was for sure also a skill gap between the different teams, and you would have some teams that would always win, some teams that would never win, and some teams that were somewhere in the middle. But I think, and that's the key point for me also in the matchmaking, you need to have enough teams in the queue so that the teams in kind of the middle of the pack are winning enough games. Because what I noticed happened back then, maybe not so much, because like I said in the beginning, it was quite fine. There were enough matches going on like every day at least. But at some point, kind of the queue starts to die out. And that's something I noticed a lot also with the arenas after a certain time, right? When, a lot of players quit kind of the game in the beginning. It had like 1 million players, and then how it always goes, right? The players level to max level, the developers are not kind of ready to release the next expansion or something. And then from 1 million players, you go to maybe a couple of 100,000. And eventually, if there's no new content, players will move on to the next game, right? So with the pool shrinking, you had, let's say maybe, I don't know, at the peak on the server we were playing on at the time, you had maybe, let's say 10 teams that were playing ranked, right? And talking about now already 4v4 arenas. And what happens then if the pool is relatively small, of course, not all of those 10 teams are going to be queuing, simultaneously. Maybe one of them starts queuing at 8 p.m. and the other team starts queuing at 10 p.m. or something like this. So realistically, the pool is already very small because there was never a cross server. So you would know all the teams you play against because they would only be from your server, right? And the thing that happens is that, if you're one of the teams that never wins, like one of the bottom teams, right? Maybe you just, started playing ranked for the first time. It's going to be like a steep learning curve. And some matches you just get one shot in 3 seconds, so you're not really learning that much. Then a lot of those teams just quit because they're never winning, right? Or maybe they're winning, let's say, 5% of the time. And that's an issue because then they quit, which means that, the second worst team, now their win rate drops from maybe 25% because they were always beating the newer team, but they were usually losing against like the top tier teams. Now the second worst team previously is now the worst team in the queue, and now their win rate drops, right? And their ranking drops, and they're feeling really bad about themselves. So they also drop out after a certain point because they don't want to be like the lowest rated team in the queue who always just loses. Not very fun. So they drop out as well. And it kind of keeps going until there's maybe only 2 or 3 teams who are playing in the queue. But my actual point is that that's for me the real problem with the Warzones, right? Because with the matchmaking, people, they're always saying, and I made so many videos on that one, that people are always saying, yeah, we should just ban all premades. But I think that's actually not the solution because the game had 4-man premades in normal Warzones for 10 years, right? And people were always complaining about it, but it was never as bad as it's now with like the 8-man premades. And I thought about this a lot, but I think one of the actual issue, or like the difference between, let's say, like a 7-man premade and a 4-man premade, why I think like the 7-man premade is 10 times worse for the matchmaking and the health of the game, is that with a 4-man premade, right, you queue up, and the game tries to find another 4-man premade on the other team to match you against. Fine, maybe it finds one, and maybe, your 4-man premade is way better than the other 4-man premade, right? And if this was in Arena, then, you would win 80 or 90% of the games, and the other team would maybe quit, right? The other 4-man premade. But because it's an 8v8 Warzone, right, the game can somehow balance it, and, everyone will have 4 random teammates. And that for me is at least what I think kept Warzones going for a long time, because the other team also gets 4 random teammates, right? And maybe their 4 randoms are better than our 4 randoms. So even though we're the better premade, we're going to lose the game, right? Or it's going to be really close. And that sort of RNG, for me, is like a big difference if you have a 4-man pre-made versus like a 7-man pre-made. Because if there's 7 players, handpicked, all former ranked players on my team, then I know there's only kind of 1 degree of freedom, right? There can only be one guy who maybe forgot to equip his gear, and he's going to do 0 DPS, but you're still going to win the game because, you know, the other team is not going to have 7 great X-ranked players because, yeah, maybe there's only 10 on the whole server, right? So that for me is like the big difference when it comes to matchmaking, and why I think like they should simply go back to the way that things were before patch 7.2 and make it so, you know, premades go back to maximum of 4 players instead of, you know, what a lot of the other people on the threads and even in my comments have been suggesting, that just everyone should just solo queue, which, you know, at least I would for sure quit the game because solo queuing is just so boring.
Well, I'm actually somebody who solo queues probably like 90% of the time and always have, so maybe I have a little bit of a different perspective on this, but this also might be just the way it is on Starforge. I feel like on Starforge, there's not even enough population of good players to balance a 4-man group sometimes. Like, if you have 4 good people in a group on one team, those might be the only 4 good players on the server online at a time.
Yeah.
And so then they will just stomp everyone because there is nobody else to match them. So like that's the problem. I mean, the problem with any matchmaking system is like that you can never have it perfect, and the fewer players you have in the pool, the harder it becomes to produce good matches out of that. So I don't know if 4 players would definitely be better than 8 players, right? Because like if it's the situation you talked about, instead of having 7 players on one team, you could have 4 on one team and 3 on the other, and that would instantly be much, much better. You would instantly get much better balanced matches. But
yeah,
with the games that I've been in, a lot of times, I don't know if a 4-player limit is small enough to support like what the population is right now. Like, kind of my thought for a system. I mean, this would suck for some people, but it might kind of produce the best matches for the most people. Is like in arenas. I'll just start with arenas. So if you queue a 4-man team, you would only get matched against another 4-man team. If you want to play other than that, you either have to be solo or in a group of 2. So you can queue 2 people, and you can get that those 2 people can be matched against 4 solo players, 2 groups of 2, a group of 2, and 2 solo players. It doesn't matter. You know, 2 and solo, that's one pool, and then full team, that's another pool. And then in 8s, I would possibly do the same thing. This is the part where it's a pretty extreme solution. Like, you could either queue your 8-man team, or you can duo queue with a friend. And so the player base is either you're in duo queue and solo, or you're 8-man. You can't do 4 players, which was the classic way it worked. And I feel like that might actually help. I mean, it would suck for some people that had 3 friends to queue with, but I feel like, at least on Starforge, a lot of the time I've been on, just having a 4-man pre-made in there, there's not enough people to make 2 4-man pre-mades and counter each other most times a day, most days of the week.
Yeah, maybe I need to play more on Starforge then. At least, I mean, the games that I've played there were basically all of them solo. And I think I only ran into like large premades maybe a couple of times. I really didn't think it was that bad, but I also play relatively early in the day, right? Because of the time zone difference. And the few games that I played, I thought, yeah, maybe you run into like a 3-man or 4-man premade, which is, you know, not super fun, but I had some pretty equal matches, I would say. I mean, with the arena suggestion, I think that's exactly what I would do pretty much as well, because I mean, already 2 players in a premade, you know, if it's, you know, a really good tank and heal, that's a big advantage. Or if it's 2, you know, deception assassins who are coordinating their burst and their hard stuns, that's going to be a big advantage for sure. But yeah, I mean, how it is right now, that you can play with, you can queue as 4 people in the arena and go against 4 randoms, it's just a bit silly. So I like that idea. I mean, you can, of course, then you could kind of say, you know, what's the point of having a 4-man queue? You might as well just do like a challenge mode, because anyways, there's maybe just 2 teams on the server. But I think what they should have done is they should have just left ranked in there, which, you know, there was already group ranked, which was a 4v4 anyway. And I think the fact that they allowed you to queue separately for arenas as kind of a practice mode was fine, right? And of course, I think that's how it already works right now, right? If you queue as a 4-man group, the game tries to put you against another 4-man group before it eventually pops against, you know, whatever is in the queue. So the core issue is there's simply not enough players on an equal skill level is the core problem, really. Like not enough skilled players that you could do any of these matchmaking fixes properly, right? And all of the fixes you want to do are kind of just band-aids at that point, because it's not really solving the core problem, right? And which is somehow surprising, because as you said in the beginning, they've been trying to make the game, you know, easier and easier to get into, like from a, you know, skill floor point of view, right? There's like less abilities you have to learn now than when the game first came out, and the skill trees are also quite simple. There's not too much where you can go completely wrong, you know. There are, of course, some points, like some pitfalls, I guess, where you can go wrong when it comes to the gearing, which, you know, is still unnecessarily complicated, I think, and you can really, you know, mess up your character if you know, just don't have any augments, for example. But I don't know. I mean, it has never been easier to get to like a certain, you know, skill floor in the game. But at the same time, yeah, as you said, the gap between 4 coordinated experienced players and a bunch of randoms on the other team has never been bigger. So it's a bit strange, right? Why, if the game is easier than ever, are there so many players who are struggling to learn it?
Yeah.
Any theories?
Yeah, I mean, I have some theories on that. I think it's pretty clear that since Knights of the Fallen Empire, yeah, so 4.0, some point during the game's life, whether it was during 3.0 or 2.0, the BioWare kind of realized that, and they have all the numbers. We don't have all the numbers on this, but I'm guessing they do. They kind of realized that all the money was coming in from people that just wanted to spend it on cosmetics and like the cartel market, and people that like to RP, people that are interested in story and you know, dressing up their character. Like that's where 95% of the players are probably in that bucket, and the people that care about multiplayer MMO combat is just small. So they started catering all of the content updates and all of their development towards that, towards story content and other systems for solo players to get cosmetic rewards. So what that means is it alienates more and more of the people that actually enjoy the mechanics of the game. And so you get like a disproportionate player pool that doesn't really know how to play very well. And you get kind of like what we have in PvP today.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, what you said earlier about like the people leveling and only using one ability, right? I mean, I haven't really leveled in a long time, but the few times, you know, where I, for whatever reason, like tried to get a character to level 20, it's so easy compared to when the game came out, right? It's the game really holds your hand, and that's the reason why they only use one ability, is because they don't need to use more than one ability, right? Like you can even do the heroics with an early companion, and you can sometimes solo them, right? Which is, you know, quests that are supposed to be for 2 or more players, for example, right? And back then, I remember they would kind of one-shot you if you tried to hit like an elite mob with your level 5 sorcerer. or Inquisitor, I guess back then.
Yeah.
They would one-shot you, so there was no thing like you couldn't solo them. And nowadays you just walk around, like, look at me, I'm Mech Blitz, and you just hit one button and then everything dies, kind of thing. So
yeah, so actually I have a story about that, just like for some contrast for how things used to be. One of my early characters was an assassin, and on Balmora in the Sith Inquisitor story, there's this guy called Major Bessiker. So he's like an Imperial NPC, part of the main Inquisitor story. If you do things a certain way, you might end up killing his son. If you do that and he finds out, the next time you go see him, you have to fight him. He has an ability called Terminate, which some NPCs have in the game.
Yeah.
So back in those days, so this was in like 2013, if you didn't interrupt Terminate would actually just kill you. Like you would just die.
Very fitting name, yes.
Yeah. And so I didn't know how interrupt worked because I hadn't played an MMO before. So I got stuck and I ended up not continuing that character because I didn't know how to get past that. Now if you do that fight, Terminate might do 10% of your health if you just let him cast it, and your healer will re-heal that health on you, your companion, immediately. And if you do nothing, you could in that fight you could now just stand in a corner, order your companion to attack, and they would just solo him. Yeah. Yes. Like that's the difference. So like the game, when you're leveling up, you're not forced to actually learn at all.
Mm-hmm.
The game used to actually, you had to stay on your toes. Like I remember there was a time where if you pulled 2 packs of mobs at the same time,
good luck.
You were in a fight for your life.
Yes, yeah. For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's one thing, right? Like you're not really learning how to properly maximize your character because you don't need to as you level up. And then the second thing is, and I think that's also underestimated, right? When people are saying, oh yeah, everything should just be solo. But that's not actually the issue. The issue is not that you have, premades stomping noobs. The issue is that you have premades of good players stomping bad solo players, right? And the way that you get good, at least the way that everyone I know got good at the game, is not by kind of figuring it out for yourself while the game holds your hand. It's by learning your class. But then the last, usually a couple of percent, comes from fine tuning, and a lot of that, for me at least, I didn't figure out by myself, right? I learned from other players because I, at some point, joined a guild, and I was also a raider back then, so we did a lot of PvE. I never played PvP even before this game, right? So I was super bad in the beginning, but I learned my class a little bit and eventually got into PvP, got my ass kicked, and there were some people in my guild who had previous experience from World of Warcraft, and they gave me some tips to saying, you're moving your character like a total beginner, like you need to do whatever strafing here and try to dodge the knockback there and things like that, right? Because I was just really bad back then. But if you have some more experienced players who can, like, your learning curve is going to be much steeper, much faster, right? So that's the other reason, is that I think PvP guilds have also kind of died after they removed the ranked Warzones because there wasn't really a reason for it. And maybe that was one of the reasons why they tried to, in the PvP revamp now, bring back the 8-man queue. Maybe they thought that would somehow lead to people forming more PvP-oriented guilds. But I haven't really seen that. What I've seen is that people that already knew each other maybe combined their premade or something, and now you have 6 players instead of 4 players queuing together. But you don't really have these PvP guilds like they used to be back in the day, where there are maybe 20 dedicated PvPers who are maybe also doing some story content and some something else on the side, right? Like, I don't want to hate on all the Space Barbie players or the story players, because there was also me. Like, that's the only reason that I even started playing Star Wars, is because I loved like original KOTOR games, because the story was crazy in those. And actually the story in this game is also really good, and up to a certain point where I didn't really care about it anymore. But like that's not a bad thing, right? To have like a good story in a game is actually a good thing. But it's an MMO, right? So you're supposed to, well, sometimes if you want to fight the big bad boss, group with other players. Not saying that everyone needs to be in a guild, but for sure, like just from my own experience, it helped me a lot. And I think nowadays there's not really a place for that. Like if you're a new player and you actually want to learn how to play a class, I think it's quite a steep learning curve and something to overcome, right? Not sure how. I mean, your experience obviously is, as you said, is quite different, right? So how is it kind of for you? Like, how did you get better at the game?
Yeah, so there were two big things for me, maybe three big things. The first was, so when I was leveling my Marauder, this is my first tune that I got to 50, 55. I had been clicking my abilities when I started out. I think almost everybody starts that way if they didn't come from a MMO background. They just don't know any better. The game doesn't do a good job of communicating how much better it is to keybind. But sometime around, like, I don't know, level 25, I was reading online that, like, hey, you should keybind. So I just did that. And I started to build, like, the muscle memory. So that was one really important thing. That thing I just kind of discovered on my own. Then I discovered there was a 5-part guide on YouTube about how to play Carnage, Marauder, and PvP.
Mm-hmm.
That was made by this guy called Darth Nish. It was for level 50, but a lot of the tips applied. So I learned a lot from that. And then the biggest thing around like 2.5, I think, I met some PvP players on Shadowlands who were former ranked 8s players.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into a guild with them and started playing with them. And they filled in like all the gaps that you wouldn't just pick up on your own, all these little things.
Yeah.
All these various tips and strategies that you just need smart, experienced players to teach.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really what kind of turned me into a permanent PvPer.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So pretty similar to my own experience, actually. And that's one of those things, right? With the guides, right? I obviously have a lot of guides on my channel who are mostly targeted also at the new players because, when I saw this problem and, a lot of people quit after the PvP revamp, I thought, if I was a new player nowadays and I wanted to look for, guides on how to get into the game, there is not much there, right? Sure, there was like some older guides that still apply. And of course, there are Cs, but except for him, there wasn't really any experienced PvPer who was doing guides, so I thought I might as well try and do some myself. But there's only so far you can go with guides, right? With trying to imitate what kind of other players, what you can learn from those guides anyway. And I guess what I want to say, there's of course the learning by doing thing, right? So you just kind of have to put some things into practice, and then you see, okay, this works, or maybe this doesn't work against these players because they also have read the guide and they know exactly what I'm doing. So now I need to go on the next level and try to, and knowing that they know what I know, I am gonna change my game plan a little bit, right? So that's one thing. But the other thing is also, if you play versus, let's say, beginners or average players, you're not really learning to play properly. And that was the big thing for me. Like, there's for sure like a tendency that and I noticed that even nowadays, right? Like if we play in a premade and we go against, whatever random players, I'm playing very poorly. Like I just run in like a bulldozer. I press all my buttons. And I just try to do whatever maximum damage to kind of overwhelm the other team. And, in most of the games, it's enough. But if you play against actual good players, that's not going to work, right? And so playing against, that's another thing that I think now is harder, because if you play improperly against, other beginners, that might work. But then once you run up into, as you said, these players that have been playing the game for 10 years, they know all the tricks. They know exactly how your class works, how their class works against it, and how they can counter what you're trying to do. The best way to learn the game is if you play against other really good players, right? Players that are a little bit better than you, because they will teach you, okay, if you do this, if you waste your CC breaker, we can now one-shot you. There's nothing you can do about it, right? So, okay, next time, maybe I shouldn't waste my CC breaker on a route, right? Or let's say you're playing against a Deception Assassin, right? Oh, maybe I should not break low slash. But nowadays, if I play against Deception Assassins, 9 out of 10 times, they will be beginners, right? So I just don't care. I just break low slash because I know I will not get punished for it, right? So playing against better players is actually the best way to learn the game, because they will show you how it actually works, and the game is different if it's played properly, and I think it's actually more fun if played properly. But most players, don't even see it for that, because I guess it also has been dumbed down to a point where, unfortunately, you can sometimes just run in like a bulldozer and do maximum DPS without thinking about anything, and it works, which is, it's a little bit sad.
Yeah. I mean, the skill gap is so wide that if you're kind of just a regular solo player and you don't know any better, let's say you're not very good or knowledgeable about the game, you could have an experience versus kind of a baseline experience versus other players like you that sets your expectations, and then when you go against good players, they beat you so hard that you think they must be cheating.
Funny thing, I just finished editing a video with exactly that title. I had a guy yesterday on Satil Shan accuse me of being a cheater because I killed him a couple of times, and he was playing Deception, and he couldn't understand how come he's not one-shotting me with his Shadowcraft opener. It works against everyone except against me. I must be cheating. So he whispered me after the game, after I killed him a couple of times. That was funny, and I sent him a link to my Deception guide. But different story.
I feel like personally, I've received the most cheating accusations when I do something that counters CC. Mm-hmm. Like if I use some type of CC immunity, just time it remotely smartly and deny someone's CC, they think I'm cheating.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, of course. I mean, if you don't know that, for example, Carnage can do that, right? You get your, what is it? Is it Ferocity? Every couple of seconds, you get your immune to all CC. If you don't know that Carnage can do that, I clicked my button. Why didn't the CC go off? Must either be lag or this guy is a cheater, right? And the funny thing is also that, at least in my experience, I noticed that the most toxic players, the ones that are, really like complaining in chat and calling other players names, are usually the ones who are new, who are not performing very well, right? They're the ones that, because people always say, all these toxic pre-made players, or PvP is so toxic, but most of the toxicity, at least in the games that I see, comes from the players who somehow sit in a corner and type while doing like 2k DPS, because they don't know what's going on, and then they're complaining about premades, right? When I can do more damage than that if I only use my basic attack, basically. But they're usually the ones who are wishing everyone diseases and stuff. And so that's probably a topic for another video. But
you can't play the game and type at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, how are you going to do DPS if all you do is like type and chat, right? But that's probably not only the case in Star Wars. Well, so what are they going to do about it? I mean, it doesn't really look like Broadsword is looking at any big PvP updates. As you said, it's looking like they know where the money is coming from. I mean, I also spend a lot of money on Cartel coins, so I cannot really complain. But I would like to see some PvP updates at some point. I'm not sure if anyone from them is listening to this podcast, but take my money, right? If there was anything to do in PvP, how would you change it? What would be like your top fixes, other than maybe like the matchmaking stuff that we already discussed.
Yeah, so outside of the matchmaking stuff, I actually was having a thought earlier. I think it would be good to incentivize winning 8v8 Warzones more than it currently is incentivized.
Yes.
Because I feel like right now, it's not fun enough to win that it stops people from, like, it's more fun to just farm kills than it is to win for most people. So that's what people are going to do. So I think to make it, I think the game is more fun when everybody is trying to win at the same time. Everybody's playing Hutt ball, or everybody is trying to cap in Civil War. That's when you get good games.
Yeah.
When everybody's actually fighting over the objective, and one team isn't just ignoring the objective and the other team's ignoring, fighting. So this is probably sounds crazy, but my idea is this. I feel like the number one thing in the game, it's Cartel coins is the number one thing, but credits is the number two thing, right? Those are the two things that everybody wants, regardless of what type of content you engage with. Everybody wants credits or Cartel coins, pretty much. I would put huge cash rewards, credit rewards on winning the game, and 0 credit rewards on losing the game. So, like, if you're on the winning team, maybe you get 1 million credits for a win.
Okay.
And if you lose, you get 0.
Interesting.
I don't know who would. The problem with that is I kind of feel like the people that like to stomp in a 5-man premade still won't care, and the solo players will care more, and it wouldn't really fix the issue. But I don't know. I feel like there's only so many incentives you can give that really matter to people. I feel like credits or some type of high value item, those are kind of the few things that people actually care about enough to make them want to do something differently.
Yeah, it's either something people want in the game, or it's something external, right? Like reintroducing a leaderboard or something like this, right?
Right.
That has been, I think, at least in the history of the game, one of the number one drivers as well. Like positive and negative, because, yeah, like I said earlier, there were for sure players who stopped queuing because of the leaderboard, because they didn't want to be the last one on the list, right? So what I was thinking was more along the lines of, you could have a, I don't know, top 10, top 50 style leaderboard, right? Where you only show the best performing players. And you can have different categories. You can order it by class, by combat style, whatever. And you can say, of course, you would have to have it by season, right? Because like what we have right now, which is just kind of tracking your average damage done per Warzone over like the whole lifetime, is kind of stupid, I think, because it doesn't really, first of all, damage is the wrong stat. You should track DPS, if anything, or even DPS compared to damage taken and so on. A different discussion, but you need to have it somehow like filtered by PvP season. I think that's like a no-brainer, because then you could say, okay, in this season, maybe I was one of the top 10 DPS players on the server, right? Which now I can say, but this is like no one gives a shit, and there's nothing I can do to prove it, right? Because there's nothing that you can objectively quantify. Okay, this guy is doing more damage than that guy over 1,000 Warzones, right? So he must be better. There's nothing like that, right? And I would maybe, they have talked about that they have some kind of hidden matchmaking ranking, right? So something like a rating for normal Warzones already, which they're using. And I noticed that on some of my characters that I have, where I play on Starforge, for example, on Satil Shan, or even on the German server. Sometimes, like, I will have maybe 70% win rates there on some characters, right? Or maybe even more. And then you notice the queue times get longer there. And I think it's not only the fact that I usually play, when I play in the American servers, I play in like off-peak times when most of you guys are still sleeping. But for sure, I've noticed that the higher my win rate gets, the longer the queue times get, which is unfortunate, because it means that the people that like to stomp, myself included, when I play in a premade, if you would really try hard to win every game, then now you need to wait in queue even longer than you already do, right? Because the game cannot find a premade for you. So actually doing it this way incentivizes the premates to care even less about the objectives, right? Because they want to artificially decrease their win rate, which is kind of stupid, but it's what happens, right? So But if you would make it like differently, like what do PvPers care about, right? Sure, credits is, I mean, for me personally, was never a big thing. I always just tried to have enough credits so I can, buy whatever consumables I need for PvP and the latest best augments, and then afterwards I didn't really care. But I'm also not the average player, I guess, right? Most people, they want to buy good looking lightsabers and stuff. And I'm somewhere in the middle. Like I like some of that, but I would never like spend a whole week just farming credits so I can buy some lightsaber. I don't care about it enough. So I'm not sure if like a credit reward would do it for me. For sure, it would help, but I think like for the competitive players, and I think most of the people, the former ranked players that are maybe like stomping in like a big premade, they would care about something like that, right? If they had, whether it's like a very exclusive title that you get if you're in the top 10 of that leaderboard, right? It's with something that they could easily implement, or whether it's simply for the bragging rights of being, in the top 10 on that leaderboard, that would work for me, I think. And then, you could, they've been saying that they remove the leaderboards because they don't want the players at the bottom of the leaderboard to feel bad about themselves. But if you simply show the top 10 of the leaderboard, or maybe the top 50, there's no harm, right? So for sure you could solve that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good innovation, because it used to be the leaderboard showed every single player who participated. So yeah, I think that's pretty smart, and that could actually help. The other thing, this one would make a lot of people mad and probably quit the game. In the extreme examples, this is wild, but I've kind of wished that it was like this way from launch. I kind of wish that DPS was actually not displayed in the scoreboard. Because
we had such a good podcast until now, man.
Well, I mean, think about what that would actually do.
Yeah.
Like DPS and damage no longer displayed in the scoreboard. You couldn't compete. Like at the end of the game, you wouldn't really know. All you would really know is, did I win or did I lose?
Sure.
That would be where all of the, all the incentive is. Like if you just
wouldn't really know why.
The game.
Like if you look back at the 8v8 ranked, for example, yes, I mean you had some games where maybe there was a ninja cap, or you would play pylons and someone would get like a super crazy combo with grenades off, and then you would win by just capping one pylon over the whole 20 minutes hypergates, So yeah, you for sure could win. I mean, Hutt Bowl is a completely different game, of course. You could win with like smart objective play, but I feel like 80% the best teams in the game won because they had superior DPS players. And you could see very clearly, like if you look at some of the old, there's Daily PvP, for example, right? The guy that commented over like all the old ranked game, which is really good. And by the way, everyone who doesn't know that channel should check out Daily PvP. I'll quickly put that up on the screen here. So
if you're like one of us and you weirdly still enjoy like old ranked PvP games.
Yes. So this guy has only 200 videos, unfortunately, but he has like all the old from 10 years ago, all the best arena games, and even like older than that, the old like 8v8 Warzones. That was some good shit. And but the best teams back then also, they were usually the ones that were winning more often than losing because they had the better DPS players. And I feel like if you completely remove that, you wouldn't really know why you're winning, I mean, you would still have, parsers and DPS meters and stuff. But
well, I mean, you could still maybe list the number of kills, because ultimately that's what's really driving it, right? Like it's that you're getting more kills. If you're doing more DPS but no one's dying, that's not really helping you win. So like other multiplayer games, so like let's say you're playing Call of Duty and you're playing Team Deathmatch, you don't see damage per second on the scoreboard. You do see kills.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, maybe that's enough of a metric to tell you what's happening.
Kills in this game are weird, and I agree. Sometimes
kills are weird.
Kills are weird because it counts. If you touch someone and then 5 years later they die of heavy metal poisoning, and still counts as a kill, kind of thing, right? Yeah. But we used to have killing blows actually on the scoreboard, which was also removed when they revamped the scoreboard.
Yeah.
So I was not a big fan because back then you could actually play for killing blows and try to get the last hit, which was another discipline of sport for, people like me who like to achievement hunt. And, one game you get like 40 killing blows, and that's really hard to get, right? Screenshot worthy. But, nowadays, if you get...
What's the highest you ever got, or the highest you've ever seen?
Killing blows, I think, it was in the 40s. I think I got like more than 40 few times. I'm not sure I've seen like 50 or 60. I mean, that's really hard because you need to get the last hit for that, right? And nowadays, like a high kill game, you can get to 100. But to get, 100 killing blows or something, I think it's not really realistic unless it's a setup. But yeah, I had a couple of 40 kill games or killing blow games. Like on Deception back then, for example, it was really good. Really good for getting killing blows.
Yeah, 40 I think was my best as well. The best I saw, I think one of my buddies got like 47 in a Void Star.
Yeah. Yeah, well, nowadays, no one knows, right? Maybe we already got more, and we will never know because it's not on the scoreboard anymore. So, I don't know. I mean, this kind of DPS farming, I think, like, as you said, if there was something that people would actually care about, then, they wouldn't really do this kind of toxic DPS farming where you're actually intentionally trying not to kill people just so they stay alive a bit longer, so you can have your dots ticking on them a little bit longer to do like 100 DPS more, just so you can feel better about yourself at the end of the game looking at the scoreboard. I mean, I agree that's a little bit silly, but also it's kind of the only competitive thing you have left nowadays, right? I mean, it's not very impressive to right-click pylons after you like steamrolled a bunch of Space Barbie players with your 8-man premade, right? It's not very impressive. So I guess that's what many people maybe don't understand is like why people farm damage is because they want to have some outlet for, their competitive drive. It's like sport, right? And that's the only thing that's left where you can compete and you can say, hey, did I do better or worse this game than this other guy, right? So yeah, there's nothing else to compete about, right? So I already have my 800 Warzone wins since they introduced that achievement, right? So I don't need more wins. Like the only thing that playing for wins does at this point for me, like I don't need tech fragments. I have every item in the game that I want. The only thing that it does is it makes my queue times longer if my win rate climbs, right? So I keep it at whatever it is, 55% or something like that. And I can't even get it lower than that because that's already me trying my lowest. Nah.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the point when they made the decision to remove ranked 8v8, it was inevitable that Warzones would eventually devolve into people just fighting for damage. At that point, they removed the incentive to win. They removed the leaderboards and removed ranking. There is no more bragging rights for winning the game.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so that's one thing they should fix. Whether they will or not, I mean, yeah, we will see. What else? Any other improvements? Yeah.
Okay, this is a very personal one. This is going to sound silly to some people. Maybe some people will get it though. So I main Carnage Marauder. Our really signature ability is Massacre.
Mm-hmm.
That is, the animation, that's the ability. At some point in 3.something, 3.1 or 3.2, they made a small update that like broke the sound file for Massacre temporarily. All right. The next patch they came back and said, "Hey, we fixed it," but they didn't actually fix it completely. So it's really hard to actually find footage now to see the difference. But essentially, what happens is when you hit Massacre, your main hand lightsaber hits, your offhand lightsaber hits, and then you do an Ataru form strike. So what used to happen is each of those sounds would make a solid lightsaber hitting a target sound.
Mm-hmm.
which you can get if you do like Vicious Slash or anything. You'll know what I'm talking about.
That
lightsaber striking sound. Whenever they made that update and then that other subsequent update, they made it so that the Ataru form hit, that third hit, doesn't make a sound anymore. It just makes a whooshing sound. It doesn't make the sound of hitting the target. So previously, the ability had this really satisfying, like visceral, loud 1, 2, 3 loud sound that like you could always tell when a Carnage Marauder was around. Like it was very recognizable and very iconic. And now it doesn't have that anymore. It's like 1, 2, and then whoosh.
Yeah.
And it just feels so weak and lame. And I feel like it would be such an easy fix if they would just recognize it. But nobody on the dev team has recognized it for like 10 years. And I'm sure it's probably just like dragging and dropping a sound file, you know, from old archives or something like that. But it's just like this small thing that it bugs me because I play the spec and
sounds like your sound is breaking up. I think like one of the developers is listening to us and they don't like you complaining about Carnage Marauder. You sounded like very robotic, but it might also have been me.
Okay. I didn't get... Is it okay now?
Yeah, now sounds great.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, basically I was saying it's like a small thing, right? Because it's just the sound of one ability. But if it's your main spec and it's the ability you use the most, just having the way it sounds kind of affects the way it feels to play. And just that one little fix, that would up the fun level a lot for me, just like just from playing in general. It's like a silly thing, but it would mean a lot.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, I'm not really playing Carnage much, but I read about that bug. People were complaining about it, and it can throw you off for sure. And I mean, especially in PvP, where you, like you said, like sometimes you're reacting to sound cues, you know. So there's this thing like if PT throws a thermal detonator, right? It has a very noticeable sound, so you will know, okay, PT is about to burst right now. And yeah, let's say if they broke the sound for that, I for sure would be very sad as well. So yeah, if someone working on Carnage is listening to this, please fix it. Make all the Carnage mains happy. And so, I mean, I wanted to think about like the SWTOR Classic a bit more. Because I mean, yeah, whether that happens or it doesn't happen, but just if we can dream and whatever, you could have the choice to go back to any point in the game's history, right? Can be Rise of the Hutt Cartel, can be when you started, can be like the legacy, like the vanilla release version of the game. Where would you start it? Like, would you do it like other games are doing it, right? Where you have World of Warcraft had the classic launch, right? Where I think it was basically a slightly modified version of the original game, and then they did the Burning Crusade release, and now they are, I think, on, I don't know, Wrath of the Lich King, right? So they're kind of replaying history almost in a way. Would you do it the same way, or would you say the game was perfect in 2.8 and I want to go back to that point?
Yeah, I would just roll it to 2.4 and just leave it.
Okay.
At that point, we had the best raids already. I mean, if you look at what people do, raiding teams do, they're still doing DFDP all the time. It's like the most popular raid. So those raids were in the game. Arenas were in the game. We had all the good Warzones. Every Warzone that was released after that has been one that you hope doesn't pop in the queue. So
when was Quash?
Quash was like 2.8.
Oh yeah, fuck Quash.
Yep, no Quash.
I hate Quash.
Undying Rage had not yet been nerfed, so when you used Undying Rage, it spent the health at the beginning, which is when it should spend it because you can get healed back up. Pyro and Advanced Prototype PowerTech had both been buffed up to be nice competitive specs. Smash was still Smash, which is dumb, but people loved it. I mean, you can't deny it was a fun thing.
For sure, it was fun, yeah.
Leveling was still tough. I mean, you had skill trees. You had gear was like reasonable to get because you had expertise and PvP comms. Augments were only purple, so they didn't cost 30 million credits or 200 million, depending on the patch. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of good the content that was there was good. You're not really losing out on good content after that, or a lot of good content. And the classes, a lot of the classes had their own identity, and they were kind of at their most fun state. So that's kind of the direction I would go with it, I think.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that's arguable, I guess, especially the last point with, when the class was the most fun. Because I remember, like, I enjoyed playing like the old advanced prototype back then a lot, which is basically like somehow a mix of Pyro and AP nowadays, right? I'll quickly like pull up that skill tree to actually look at.
I wanted to ask you about that. Like, do you prefer the AP version of the burst PT spec or the old Pyro version with?
You know what? I never really liked the old Pyro version, and that might be surprising to a lot of people. But only after they changed it, like after they basically turned AP into the spec that is today, which is having thermal detonator and of course the reset on rail shot, right? The prototype particle accelerator, which is basically the core of the spec.
Yes.
So that's the one I play now all the time, and I'm gonna keep playing until they turn off the servers one day. So for sure, for me, like the most fun version of the class. But back then, that kind of existed, right? It existed, just it was called PowerTech, and you had the cylinder, which nowadays you have on Pyro, combustible gas. You had incendiary missiles. So actually, the spec back then was, like I said, kind of a mix of what you have nowadays in AP and Pyro. And they kind of swapped some abilities around. So Pyro now has the prototype flamethrower, or I think now it's called superheated flamethrower, I think. Which gives you the extra damage and the crazy slow. That used to be an AP thing, now it's a Pyro thing. So it's kind of almost like the specs just changed the names, but everyone kind of kept their the cell, I guess it's what they kept. And some of the talents also stayed the same, right? Like AP still has retractable blade, for example, so that didn't get swapped. But back then, my first, I guess, all the way in the beginning, I played some assassin. Then my second was a sorcerer, but then I started maining guardian tank, and that's when I got into PvP. And then my second main became like the old AP. So that's what I played back then all the time, and actually had a lot of success with as well. So that's when I really started getting good and playing a lot of like 1v1 tournaments on the German server and everything like that. But yeah, nowadays it's quite different, and I enjoy AP way more than Pyro.
Interesting.
I don't know if I would go back. Actually, that would feel super weird. It's just like looking at the skill tree. Like you have Immolate. I don't remember if Immolate was hitting super hard back then. I remember like the big thing was the flamethrower, right? Because you could get like 3 stacks, and you would do a lot of damage with that. And I also like the animation of it was super cool. I think now you only have that on the PT tank. The big flamethrower that comes like from the wrist of the PowerTech, and it's like super cool, looks like flames. Because what Pyro has nowadays, Pyro has kind of the same buff with the mega slow and the extra damage, but Searing Wave just looks nowhere as close, as cool as the old flamethrower does. So
for sure,
I think my perfect class, if I could somehow like combine it, would be like that flamethrower, but otherwise basically how AP is nowadays, plus that flamethrower. That'd be like my dream.
Okay. Yeah, I was a big fan of Pyro, Burst Pyro, the old one with the rail shot reset.
Yeah.
So I liked it so much that I almost kind of became a permanent Pyro PT main at one point, but I eventually stuck with Carnage. Yeah, I liked it better because Pyro flamethrower Pyro, or dot Pyro, what it is now, the flamethrower, the AoE part, never quite lived up to the way that old flamethrower was when it was AP. That flamethrower hit so hard.
Yep.
You could do like, so you could get 5k ticks, right? So you could do 20k damage to like, multiple people in 1 3-second channel if you had explosive fuel up, which is just nuts.
But I mean,
Pyro never really reached those levels of just like pure AoE.
Yeah.
Flamethrower damage.
I mean, AP can also do good AoE nowadays, but it's kind of hidden, right? It's you just put retractable blade on everyone, like I said earlier, and then you AoE into a bunch of people, and it procs that the extra retractable blade damage on all of them. It's kind of sneaky. It's not as satisfying as charging up a flamethrower and then discharging it into like 6 people, slowing them and watching them burn. That's hits a little bit different, right? Than slowly dotting away at them.
Yeah.
So for sure, that was the really iconic ability for sure. That I wish they would bring back. Not sure why they removed that. Have you played a lot of like the new AP? You said you're mostly Carnage, but because the new AP is pretty much what Pyro used to be back then, without the dots.
Yeah. I've played it. I've played it plenty. I've played it a lot. So yeah, I'm quite familiar.
Yeah. Yeah, like that's kind of the double-edged sword for me, right? If you were thinking about, if anyone out there is thinking about at EA or wherever thinking about making a SWTOR Classic, I wouldn't be quite sure if I would. I mean, for sure, I would enjoy playing the old AP again. For sure, I would also try out the old Pyro because I never really played that back then. But it was already a very strong spec, right? There were a lot of good players who were playing Pyro, also in arenas and so on. But I never really got around to getting good at it. So I think it would be cool if they, like to what you were saying earlier, right? Where maybe was the perfect point in the game, 2.4 or something like this. And I think it would be fun if they, would just reset it to the launch. And of course, there were a couple of things that, they don't need to repeat. Funny bugs that happened over the years with bolster and so on. And the gearing system already back then was probably even worse than it's now with the RNG boxes and so on. So those are things that, I mean, maybe for nostalgia, you could put it back in. I wouldn't really, be sad if they improve it. I kind of do like a classic plus version of the game. But I would like to see like the really old classes again one more time. And then, you can of course release expansions, make people pay for that again. And eventually bring it to a point where I'm not really sure I want to play through, Knights of the Eternal Throne chapters again. I'm not really sure that I would be up for that. So yeah, maybe freeze it before the dot spread thing becomes a thing. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason they're able to do all that with WoW is that WoW Classic was there's such a demand for it. I don't know if you would have the demand for it where you could sort of retrace the release, expansion releases of the Classic game with SWTOR. You might just have to have one single instance of Classic, and I don't even know if that would have a population, but I hope it would. I would certainly play it. I would play that every day.
Me too.
I would completely drop the live game and only play that if it came out.
I would dedicate my whole life to that game if it was properly made.
And I feel like there are.
I'm ready.
There's a decent number of people who feel the same. You just don't hear from them anymore because they don't play anymore.
Sure. I mean, there was 1 million subscribers at some point after launch, right? And then because they weren't fast enough at bringing out the endgame content, most of them had quit after a couple of months, right? And then there was like I said earlier, dying of the PvP guilds after they removed the 8v8 ranked and so on, and kind of went downhill from there. So, I think like the biggest issues was like lack of content and of course the performance, which always was a problem for PvP, especially, if you could fix that, I think you could make a very compelling game for, where I don't see why it shouldn't be able to compete with something like World of Warcraft. in terms of PvP, at least, because the combat in this game, I think, still is one of the best out there when it comes to MMO PvP, at least. Like, I still haven't found anything better or seen anything that, compels me to, I should play that game instead, right? Like, tried a couple of others, right? There's, I don't know, Final Fantasy, ESO. I played some WildStar when that released. That was like a huge hype game, of course. But that game had so many issues with the targeting, like these kind of, I forgot how it was called. But yeah, you have these kind of, everything was basically an AoE and you had to aim it, which in theory sounds nice, going away from top targeting, but yeah, kind of how they did it was just a huge mess. And you, I think probably also because of like performance and stuff, were never really sure, like, why did I miss right now on my screen that hit, So I think how this game, like the basic mechanics of it, when they first launched the release version of the game, were actually really good, right? With, guard and the abilities in the game were actually quite balanced. And of course, there were some outliers. There always will be, right? And some things got nerfed very quickly. And but I guess that's probably two different ideas, right? The one idea is just like the going back to the way like things were, just to kind of relive that once and maybe try things that you didn't try the first time, like me on Pyro. And the other idea would be like, what was the perfect point in the game when it was the most fun? And let's freeze it there at a certain point in time, right? And then, we can play that great game forever, basically, on in like a time capsule almost. So
that's the tough thing with persistent online games, is for a lot of people, there is one specific time in the game where that version of the game was their favorite game of all time, or their favorite version of that game, and you simply can't play it anymore. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So that's the tough thing for me. Like that, that version of the game, old SWTOR, is probably my favorite game of all time, and I cannot play my favorite game of all time and I haven't been able to for the past like 9 or 10 years until they, if and when they do come up with a, like a classic server, I won't be able to again. And that's something that's unique to persistent online games that isn't the case for like other types of games.
True. Yeah, I mean, for some of the classic games, you have something like Good Old Games, right? Which like bring out the classic games from like the 90s and stuff. I'm not sure how old you are, but for me, like I started gaming in the 90s, and there's a lot of games from back then that I want to play again in exactly that version how it was back then, before there were like online live service games. There basically was one version of the game. It stayed the same. Maybe got some small bug fixes. But if you bought the CD back then, you kind of had the game, and that was the game, right? And then you can play that, and some of them are so good and it was so fun that now, which is almost 30 years later, I keep going back to play those games sometimes. And of course, not all of them are like actually the same code. They are maybe like remastered versions that have similar mechanics but better graphics, because you kind of do get eye cancer if you look at some of the old games from the 90s back then. But for sure, that's a trend, I think, right? There's like Age of Empires, Ultimate Edition, and like a lot of classic strategy games that have like a remastered version. There's Diablo, of course, which I played like so much when I was a kid. So why not do the same thing with SWTOR? I mean, for sure, I think the interest is there. Star Wars is still popular, even though Disney is trying their best to to change it, apparently. But I don't know. I know so many players who would come back to play this game if there was like a classic release, just with like proper performance and some of the worst bugs from then fixed. So yeah, if anyone is planning to do that, please take my money.
Yeah, I would pay for it. I would pay $15 a month to play that. Yeah,
I mean, the other thing is expansions, right? Like we talked about it a little bit, but World of Warcraft had very big, very impactful expansion, let's say. This game, not so much, right? You had Rise of the Hutt Cartel, some new abilities, but there was never like a new class introduced to the game, for example, we're still playing the original classes that we had at launch, right? Which is another thing that I wish there could have been, different classes in the game, that would have been cool, or just like more abilities, maybe some abilities removed in favor of like new ones. But the only really expansions where that happened was, the 2.0, and then 3.0 had some shuffling around. I don't even remember if 3.0 had actually new abilities. Forgot so much about that expansion, but
yeah, it had replacements. That's when they brought in like Devastating Blast, like more powerful versions of it.
Yeah.
That
okay. Same thing, but yeah. Same, but different.
Which are basically just animation updates.
Sure.
It's really all they were. They weren't really new abilities. Yeah.
So that's the other thing, right? Like, I'm not sure there would be a big market for, let's say, a relaunch of 4.0, because there wasn't that much new content anymore, like MMO content at that time.
Right.
So yeah, maybe launch the game and then freeze it at some point before it starts going downhill. Like, at least compared to other games where, in WoW you had Burning Crusade, which is many people's like favorite expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, and then at some point Cataclysm, Mist of Pandaria. Most people agree the game changed like a lot for many people for the worse and so on, which I guess also explains why the classic is so popular. And I'm actually interested into seeing like how they're gonna continue with that, whether they're just gonna release all of the expansions or what they're gonna do, like the less popular ones. It should be interesting because, as you said, I think the market is mostly like people want to play those games that they remember that don't exist anymore. So I'm not sure if there's some future where, I don't actually know. Is it like that in WoW? Like, can you still play Classic? No, right? They have moved on. They have moved on now to like the Wrath of the Lich King, I think.
I think I actually watched a video about this recently. It looks like they maintain different servers for different expansions. So like there is
that's cool.
Like a true vanilla, and then there's a Wrath server, and there's a Burning Crusade server, and now a Cataclysm server is coming out. Which I don't know. I feel like Cataclysm was the one that people hated, so I don't know why anyone would want to go back to that. But who knows?
There's maybe someone who started playing that expansion that really likes it.
There's one thing that kind of gives me hope for a classic SWTOR. I don't know if it should or not. But I guess so. I never played it, but Star Wars Galaxies had like a Cataclysm-like update that totally changed the game that everybody hated. So around soon after SWTOR came out, I think they shut down the official servers for Star Wars Galaxies. But there is a like fan project server where it's the classic version of the game that everybody loves, and that's available. You can play that now. So that gives me hope that somehow, some way, that can happen for SWTOR, maybe, if it's not through official channels even.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, we need someone to, take matters into their own hands. And I think I've been thinking about this, like, how would you even approach that? Because I think, and that's maybe also what's like difficult for Broadsword and formerly BioWare and so on, right? I think probably a lot of the code from back then, they cannot simply go back to that. It doesn't probably even exist anymore, right? I remember reading something at some point in time about, we kind of deleted some code here by accident, and I don't actually remember.
I would hope that, but it may not be the case, but I would hope that like every build of the game is stored somewhere, but maybe it's not. Maybe they don't keep a copy of every build of the game on a server. That's somewhere.
I think that might not be the case. So it might not actually be that easy to simply push a button and launch a SWTOR Classic tomorrow. So probably like either you do like a complete remaster of the game, right? Like similar to SWTOR 2.0, right? You just start from scratch and come up with, new engine, maybe even new classes. Some classes will be similar. similar to how, going back to Diablo, right? There was like a Diablo 2 hugely popular, and then at some point you had 3 and 4, which had, some similarities, but each of these games also, introduced something new. So maybe that's more realistic than because, if some of the old code doesn't exist anymore, might be difficult. You certainly don't want to, go with the hero engine again. I think that was a crucial mistake that they did back then. Knowing what we know now, that's performance I still get on like a high-end PC. I get 10 FPS in some Warzones, which just shouldn't happen. I don't know, there's maybe not too much they can do about it at that point. I think if you would really probably the best guess would be to start from scratch with a proper modern engine, similar game concept, and the game design, the class design, how they had it in one of the first expansions. And I'm not sure if there's a developer currently working on that, but if not, I guess it will have to be a fan project. So yeah, any developers out there, reach out to me. We'll get some players together, and I think the biggest challenge would be maybe not even the technical part, coding that game, but first of all just to figure out how exactly stuff worked back then, because I think also a lot of the databases from back then don't exist anymore. So even just this discussion that we're having right now, I played back then, and you played back then, but I don't exactly remember whether it was 3 or 6% that, I don't even remember all the talents in the game. So you would need to have some kind of data mining of the original game files, or someone with a very good memory, or some kind of community project trying to bring that all together. Because, websites like the SWTOR Spy still exist, but I'm not sure if there's someone saved all that old data from the original launch of the game. That'd be.
I think you would have to have the original code. You would have to have the original game to really do it. I don't know if there's another way. It would. Without that, I just don't know how you would reverse engineer the whole thing. So
I
don't know if that exists somewhere or not. I hope that it does.
It's of course also let's say at least a legal gray area, right? I've talked with Sith about this the last time, where some guys are doing something similar for WoW arenas, right? Ring of Titans or something it was called, where they basically they copy some of the mechanics of the game, and give all the classes different names, but you can see from the look and feel and from the mechanics of how the game plays that it's, let's say, very heavily inspired by World of Warcraft arenas. And I think for SWTOR you would have to do something different, right? Maybe you couldn't call the class Advanced Prototype because you would get sued by EA. But if there was a fan project, right, they would basically have a class that has a thermal detonator or something similar. I don't know how you call it. Explosive detonator, and instead of a flamethrower, you have a, I don't know, fire glove or something like that, right? You change the names around a little bit, but basically it plays and feels the same way. Then I think something like that for sure could be in a legal gray area where you could have basically a fan project like that could be made. That'd be cool.
I don't know if that would really. I don't think for me that would really scratch the itch. I think I would want the whole thing.
That's the thing. Yeah.
I would want the leveling. I would want the animations, the names, the
sounds. The sounds are a big thing, like you said earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would want the whole package as it was.
Yeah, the sound design in this game is really good. I like a lot of the sounds in the game, and it's also one of the reasons. I think a lot of WoW players enjoy WoW, right? Because you have very impactful sounds that really tell you, okay, something's happening right now. But that is this ability sounds really cool, right? Like you were saying with Massacre. And I think in a similar way in this game, there are a lot of iconic abilities. Like obviously, think about Thermal Detonator, for example, right? Or like the old Ravage, the Master Strike that they could bring back. Think about Heatseeker missiles, which is a super cool animation, especially if you have the AoE talent where they fly in all kinds of directions, right? Or like death from above. I wish they could have done something with death from above, where maybe you have mobility while you use that, so you're kind of jetpacking around and you're not static in one spot. That would have been super cool. But yeah, that's one of those things with those fan projects, right? Because there is also a lot of like WoW private servers. I think I tried one out in the past, and it just was okay.
Yeah, I've been getting YouTube ads for one of those, Ascension WoW. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I don't know. It's not quite the same thing, huh?
Yeah. So it's like I said in DMs, like SWTOR Classic is like a pipe dream for me, right? I don't expect it to ever happen, but man, would I love if it did.
Same here.
Yeah. Well, I think I need to get going.
Sounds good, man. Yeah. Thanks for doing this. It was fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. It was a lot of fun for me too.
Anytime, man. Yeah. I think it's nice to meet people like this, because we didn't know each other before, and just met over YouTube comments, and I guess a shared passion for the early expansions of this game. So yeah, good talking to you, and let's do it again sometimes.
Yeah, sounds good.